Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. I'm so psyched that you are here with me. Someone wrote in a letter to me, and so I am going to be answering that letter about emotional labor in relationships. What is it? How do you know if you're doing more or less than your share? And how to even it out, basically. So, why don't we get moving into that content, shall we? We shall. So basically, what is it? What is emotional labor? So there's two sort of different schools of thought. One is it's all of the time and energy that you spend doing something. So it's not just relationships. It could be work relationships, friendships, sibling relationships, and yes, of course, romantic relationships. But we're not only talking about romantic relationships. We're talking about doing more than your share or doing less than your share. So to run a home, let's just say, there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into keeping it going. And if you're not the one who's keeping it going, it would be really hard to actually give credit to or super appreciate the amount of psychological, emotional bandwidth that is required to remember if you have one kid, two kids, three kids, four kids, the schedules, the teachers, the doctors, the things, the play dates, what they're doing, trying to travel, who's got what boosters, who needs what. I mean, right there alone. That's not even talking about all the other things that have to happen to actually keep a household effectively running. And again, these are things that you may not talk about, but they do impact you, right? So this is friends, family, work, anywhere. And it's not about heterosexual relationships. It's about any relationships, right? So it doesn't really matter because there's a tendency for one person. It's sort of like how an overfunctioner can attract an underfunctioner. That is a phenomenon that I've seen in my practice. This is kind of the same thing, but so much of this has to do with communication and lack of effective communication. So I'm going to give you some things that you can, like a checklist, so that you can see what does it actually mean, because it's not just the stuff that you do that keeps something running, whether it's work, whether it's home. There's also something that has to do within a relationship. There is emotional labor required for a relationship to be healthy, right? We have to sometimes have hard conversations that we don't feel like having. We have to confront someone. We have to share the burden of things. That is emotional labor. So if you're in a relationship or a friendship with someone and they don't like to talk, right? They resist having those conversations. That you know that more of the emotional labor is on you. If they won't even have the conversation with you, that's putting you in the position of sort of having to work it out on your own, which doubles the amount of work that you're doing. If the person acts things out in a more passive aggressive way. You might have a friend who's moody, but you really know that she's pissed off about something or he's pissed off about something, but they're like moping around because they didn't like what you did or didn't do. But if you confront them or say, hey, let's talk about it, they'll be like, no, I'm just tired. So they're blocking you from sharing the emotional labor because it also takes bandwidth from you to be around someone who is toxifying the energy around you with their negativity or with their silence, if they're being withdrawn in silence, to kind of torture you. And think about it. As women, there's a tendency for us to be a little bit, we're like sponges to a degree. You know, part of it is training, right? We are the bridgers and the connectors in life. This is how a lot of us were raised. But we're also naturally, to a degree, studies say, have a tendency to be more sensitive to what is around us. And so if someone, a friend, a partner, even our hairdresser, is upset about something, is struggling with something, a lot of times that will take energy out of us. The way that we feel about it takes energy out of us, right? So we want to be mindful of what we're also taking on that maybe someone's not necessarily asking us to take on. That's like we're doubling our own emotional labor by being codependent or by being a fixer. So it's not just about the other person not doing as much. It's about not being able to have the conversation and about them sort of blocking you. So you might be in a relationship with someone, and it could be a friend as well, who not only do they not want to have the conversation, meaning they're not in touch with their feelings enough to talk to you about it or to share it with you, but they also don't necessarily want to talk about your feelings, that it's hard for them to hold space for you to just talk about what's going on with you or to vent. They sort of want to shut that down. Again, this puts more emotional labor onto you if someone isn't willing to bear the burden with you. If you find yourself venting about your partner or a friend with other people quite a bit, but you're not talking directly to that person who you're having a problem with, that is you not doing the emotional labor, right? That's you avoiding doing the work because there's a buildup of frustration that needs your attention. But what it doesn't need is for you to be going to the same friend, dumping the same crap that you've been having a problem with in this friendship, this relationship with one of your siblings, without actually going to the source. Because this is, there's nothing your friend can do other than not want to talk to you about it anymore, basically, right? Another thing is that if you find yourself making excuses, I put this in the category of the lies we tell ourselves to avoid having conversations that maybe we don't feel that we have the skills to have, and yet you need to have the conversation. So we might make excuses, right? If you're always making excuses for your partner or for that particular friend, like, oh, they're in a bad mood because this is a busy time of year for them at work, or, oh, she just got divorced and so I know that she's being really mean to me, but it's because of whatever. Again, this is a way of sort of sparing yourself from sharing the emotional labor with the other person by actually having a conversation. And, it's you doing that really isn't going to make the situation better. And it's exhausting to be the person who is doing all of this and not just remembering everything that needs to happen, whether it's a household thing or it's a work thing, or also taking on more of the emotional relationships. A lot of times in a more of a heteronormative stereotypical relationship, we would see that a lot of times the wife would keep the relationship with the mother-in-law. They're writing out the birthday card to their mother-in-law from both the husband and the wife. And so same thing with kids. Now, this might be back in the day. I do believe it's antiquated and things are changing, and yet I also know from the letters that you send me that a lot of you are still in the same situation where you do feel overburdened by the amount that you're doing, because you're also processing not just your feelings, but when someone won't talk to you or won't help you come up with a solution, you're dealing with your feelings of anger, of upsetness, of sadness, but then you're also dealing with them not being willing to deal with it. So that adds to the burden. If it becomes tense within the household or within a friendship, that basically adds to the burden. There was something that I learned years ago about passive-aggressive anger, which sounds so intentional, right? So I don't mean it to sound intentional, because a lot of times we're behaving in a passive-aggressive way because we don't have the skills or the vocabulary, the language, the strategies to deal directly with something that's going on. So many years ago, when my husband and I first were together, and I had just become a psychotherapist, so I was really into having a very healthy, psychologically healthy relationship. And I would always say to him, hey, if there's anything that I'm doing that's like bothering you or getting on your nerves, tell me, because I want to know. Like I would change it, because everything with Vic was always fine. Like everything's fine. Everything's not a problem. So for those who don't know my background, I married a widower. He had 3 teenage sons at the time. They're now all grown up. We've got grandbabies now. But at the time, it was like there was a part of Vic that was so grateful that I was, taking on him and these teenage boys. And so I almost felt like he never wanted to tell me if something was bothering him because he just felt like he was just so happy I was there that he didn't want to do anything to mess it up, kind of. That was a little bit of my feeling. And if I would say to him in therapy, I would say, he never tells me that I'm doing anything that's bothering him, which I know can't be true. Because I'm a therapist and I know that that's not even possible. And my therapist said, does he ever get mad at you? And I said, no. And she said, well, what are the things that frustrate you about him? And I said, well, he is time challenged. And so he'll make me late to things. Like, I'm very anxious about time. I have been. I'm better now. But I mean, years ago, I was like, time, forget it. I was very much, if someone was late, I'd be mad. It was a whole thing. But so now, she when I said to her, he makes me late for things, or I'm sitting in the car like a crazy person, like beeping the horn. We were supposed to be leaving 10 minutes ago. He would go back in the house 5 times, forget things. And she said, oh, do you know what's happening there? And I said, no, but it's the only thing that we fight about. And she said, oh, that is him. That's how he is expressing his anger or, displeasure with you about something that he can't put into words. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I do not understand that at all. Keep in mind, I was a therapist. She was like, Tara, that's what passive-aggressive anger is, though. And I want you to understand it. So this is how she explained it to me. She said, Vic wants to disavow his anger or annoyance at you because it's too threatening to him, because he wants the relationship to work. So he's disavowing it to himself. He's not even aware of it. So basically, you're chopping it off. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see what I'm doing. It's like you're chopping off the anger, and then he's taking that anger and shoving it down my throat. So he was doing something that somewhere down deep he knew, because we'd had this same argument. A couple who never fought, and we've been together 22 years, and we still basically never fight about anything. We talk, we communicate, we sometimes get pissed off, but not, some couples just don't fight a lot. That's not your nature together, and that was definitely, we were not a fighting type of couple, but we would have the same reoccurring issue over and over about time. So she was explaining it to me that his anger that he couldn't handle, he would do something that would make me explode in anger. So what he got out of that was that he got the relief of his anger being expressed, even though it was being done in a weird way. And I know that this is like a heady concept. You're like, wait, what? But I think you understand what I'm saying. Passive-aggressive anger is when one person does something that consciously somewhere they know is going to piss off the other person, and the other person is going to express that anger. The weird thing about passive-aggressive anger is that when you're the person that the anger is being shoved down your throat, my response to Vic would be overblown. I would be doing double the emotional labor, and I would be twice as pissed off as I would normally be about anything, because I finally came to understand through my own therapy that I was not just feeling my anger and my real frustration about being sitting there. I was feeling his disavowed anger that he had shoved down my throat. Make sense? Wow, I should do a whole episode on passive-aggressive anger and what it actually is. But this is something that is tied into emotional labor, because in that instance, and I shared it with you, hoping it would be a clear example. In that instance, Vic wasn't willing then to talk about anything that was on his mind if he had a beef with me about something. But I ended up, because he wasn't willing to do that until I figured all this out in therapy, I ended up doing twice the emotional labor around that part of the relationship. When I finally told him, I was like, Ruth thinks that, my therapist, Ruth thinks that you being late is this is how you're expressing your anger in a passive-aggressive way. And he's like, I don't think so. I don't think so. I was like, no, I think so. And here's the thing. I'm not telling you have to do anything differently. This was my thing, because it was my realization that I was 50% of that dynamic. That wasn't just on Vic, And I said to him, listen, I'm just telling you right now, I'm not having this same argument with you about time for the rest of our lives. I'm not. So I need to look at my own side of the street. Why am I so crazy about being early to things? And I always think we're going to be late, even though I'm never late. Like, I get that I'm neurotic about time. But you have to handle your side of the street. You have to handle, why is it so hard for you to tell me anything that I'm doing that it could be bothering you? Because do you understand that I really care? Like, I actually want to know. I'm interested in the nuances of your happiness, not just that you're grateful that I'm here. If I'm doing something small that is bothering you, I could stop doing it, and I would want to, but I can't read your mind, so I don't know what it is. And he was like, all right, you always want there to be something wrong. Nothing's wrong. I was like, okay, that's not what I'm saying. And then he said, well, you know when you wash your hair, you have a lot of hair, and you leave it in the drain sometimes. Can you not do that? I was like, yeah, sure. I can never do it again, and I don't think I ever have in literally 22 years. Since you told me that, I was like, I'm happy. What else can I do that would make your life happier or better? But do you see the difference of what I'm talking about? And do you see the nuances of that? That it's one thing to be working on a relationship. Now, when we're talking about emotional labor, it isn't just the organizing of things or the keeping up relationships with families or the organizing your friends to get together. That's emotional labor and bandwidth of your brain, yes. But there's more to it than that, because if people are not willing, if people in your life are not willing to be a part of the solution, and once I was able to explain this to Vic, and this was, the first year we were together, he was able to get on board, and, we figured it out. Obviously, we don't fight about that anymore, and didn't, we only did for the first year or two of our relationship. But if he hadn't been able to get on board, if we hadn't been in therapy, if I hadn't been in therapy, that I feel like that is something that could have just built up so much resentment and exhaustion for feeling like I'm always trying to make sure that we get places on time and you don't care, or you're making me late, right? So I want you to think about this in your own life. Where is it that you are volunteering to do more of the emotional labor? A, because you're a codependent, or B, maybe because you just don't have the skills to actually have the conversation. The last thing I want to say about this is I read an article about this, and a woman shared the way that she was able to express to her husband about the emotional labor, and looked like they had a good relationship. It wasn't like, this isn't like if you're not equally doing the emotional work that you're in a bad relationship. It isn't that. So, but there are ways, and this was one of them, that she actually talked to her husband about wanting him to shoulder more of the emotional labor in their marriage. And something as simple as getting yourself out of the middle. So she gave an example that they had hired a dog walker, and her husband texted her and said, can you cancel the dog walker for today? And she would normally have done that. And instead of doing that, she texted him back and was like, hey, here's your number. You can, seeing as how you're an engineer and have a brain, so you can do it. She maybe didn't say that, but that was the point. So also think about, where is it that you're the point person on all things in your life, or where your partner is? Because that, just talk about doubling the emotional and physical, the actual bandwidth that you're putting out there. It isn't necessary. And the other thing that this woman did is that she put up a whiteboard, and she basically said, these are all the things that need to happen in the house every week. These are all the things that happen to keep our life the way it is. Which ones do you want to do? Like, I've been doing them all, but I don't want to anymore. So, and she said, there was something about putting it all on a whiteboard that it made it harder for her husband to turn around and be like, I think you should do them all. You know what I mean? Like, he kind of couldn't, because it was unfair. Although she believes that he would have let her go on doing them all until she got to the whiteboard thing. And then they were able to sort of split things more equitably. And there was a lot less resentment on her part, because it's exhausting and you have to speak about it. So the last thing I'll say about this is that you have to bring it up. If you're in a relationship or a friendship where you're doing more, you have to be able to have the conversation. And before you can do that, you have to understand why you're doing it. Like, you have to understand, did you see this? Is this the way your mom was, the way your dad was? Because the more we understand how we became the way we were, if we are shouldering more of the emotional labor than we would like to be in our relationships, in our workplace, in our life. There's a reason why we're doing that. And I hope that the ideas that I've given you today will help you to create more equitable relationships in your life. So, if you like this episode, please share it with all the people in your life, your social media platforms. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast, please do so. If you love the show and you support it, the best way to support the show is to leave a good review. We're trying to get 1,000 5-star reviews on iTunes. We're rated right now in the top 52 of all health and wellness and mental health podcasts on iTunes. And we're kind of excited about that, me and Team TC, because we've been doing this for 5 years and we have work to get here. So please support us in our quest to get 1,000 5-star reviews. Please do. I mean, if you think it's 5 stars, obviously. All right, so to be continued. I hope you guys have an amazing week. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about emotional labor. So drop me questions, thoughts, and comments in all the various places. I hope you have an amazing, amazing week. And as always, take care of you.